The first thing Ivy Alcott saw was the ring. Thick, heavy, gold, sitting like a chain on her finger. The second thing she saw was the man standing across the hotel suite, shirtless, expressionless, holding a glass of whiskey like it was the most normal morning in the world. She didn't know his name. She didn't remember the wedding. But he remembered everything, including the reason he married her, to destroy her family. The room was too quiet for a city like Vegas. No music, no traffic, no voices, just the faint ticking of a modern gold clock on the wall. Ivy Alcott stirred in bed, groggy and confused, the silk sheets unfamiliar against her skin. Her mouth was dry. Her head pulsed with a dull, heavy ache, the kind that followed too much alcohol and too little memory. She sat up slowly, blinking against the sunlight pouring through the tall windows. That's when she saw the ring. It glinted on her finger, thick and golden, hugging her hand like a trap she hadn't noticed before. It looked real, heavy, expensive, and terrifying. Her stomach twisted. She scanned the room. It wasn't hers. It wasn't the hotel room she checked into with her best friend, Zoe, 2 nights ago. This was something else entirely, a luxury suite at least 10 times bigger, with polished floors, velvet armchairs, and a bottle of champagne still sweating on the table. A man's jacket rested neatly over a chair. His shoes were placed side by side near the foot of the bed. And then Ivy noticed the bruise. It was faint but visible, dark fingers curled like shadows around her wrist. Her breath caught. She stood quickly, wrapped the blanket around her, and stumbled into the bathroom. The woman in the mirror didn't look like Ivy. Her mascara was smeared, her lips pale, her eyes wide with panic. Behind her, the door creaked. She turned sharply. He was standing in the doorway, calm as stone. Tall, barefoot, shirtless, hair slightly tousled like he hadn't slept, or didn't need to. He looked at her like he already knew how she'd react. "Good morning," he said. "Wife." The word made her knees weak. What? Her voice cracked. The man walked inside, slowly, like a hunter in no rush. "You really don't remember anything." Ivy shook her head. "Who are you?" He leaned on the counter and set a folded paper next to the sink. Cameron Thorne. The name hit her like ice water. The billionaire. The one always in Forbes. The one with a reputation for being cruel in boardrooms and colder in courtrooms. She looked down at the paper. A marriage certificate. Her name. His. A date stamp. A Vegas chapel name she didn't recognize. "No, this has to be fake," she whispered. Cameron's face didn't change. "It's real. We're married. Legally." "I didn't agree to this," Ivy said, stepping back. He looked at her like she was being naive. "You did. I have the video. I was drunk. You said yes. Loud and clear. Want to watch it?" Ivy's chest tightened. "This has to be a mistake. I want an annulment." Cameron took a long sip of his drink. "That's not going to happen." "Why?" she asked. "Why would you want to stay married to someone you don't even know?" His eyes were ice. "Oh, I know who you are, Ivy Alcott. I've known for years." She froze. "I know your father. Walter Alcott. Alcott and Sons. Real estate tycoon. Greedy. Dishonest." Her breath caught. "What does he have to do with this?" Cameron stepped closer, so close she could feel the heat of his anger beneath his smooth exterior. "He took something from my family a long time ago. Something I plan to get back." Ivy's throat tightened. "And you think marrying me will fix that?" "No," Cameron said with a calm cruelty. "Marrying you is just the start." He turned and walked out of the bathroom like the conversation had ended. Like the war he'd just declared was already won. Ivy stood frozen in the marble silence, heart racing, trying to make sense of the nightmare she had woken up in. But one thing was clear. This wasn't a love story. This was revenge. And she had just become the weapon. Ivy barely waited for the sound of Cameron's footsteps to disappear before she moved. She ran back into the bedroom, heart racing, still clutching the blanket around her body. Her first instinct was to find her phone, call Zoe, call her father, anyone. But her purse was gone. She checked the bedside drawer. Empty. The closet. Nothing. She yanked open the nightstand, the minibar, the bathroom cabinets. Nothing. Not even a cheap pen or hotel notepad. It was like the room had been cleared out before she even woke up. Her fingers trembled as she picked up the hotel phone and dialed the front desk. "Hi," she said, trying to sound calm. "I need to leave this room. Can you please call a taxi?" There was a pause. Then the woman on the other end replied politely, "I'm sorry, but Mr. Thorne has requested no outside contact or transport unless approved directly by him." Ivy's stomach dropped. "What? That's illegal. I'm a guest." "I understand, the woman said gently, "but you are listed under his account. He's paid for everything. The room. The services. The staff." Ivy slammed the phone down. Her pulse thudded in her ears. She walked to the door and pulled it open, only to find a bodyguard standing directly outside. Big. Broad. Wearing all black. No smile. "Going somewhere, Mrs. Thorne?" he asked, voice flat. She shut the door and backed away, heart pounding now. What the hell had she gotten herself into? By noon, she was dressed, in a soft designer dress she didn't recognize, laid out neatly for her, tags still on. There were no shoes, no wallet, no ID. Nothing that could help her leave. Cameron returned around 2 p.m., dressed in a grey suit, calm as ever. He sat across from her like they were two strangers having coffee, not two people who had just woken up married under suspicious circumstances. "I want out," Ivy said, her voice low but steady. Cameron glanced at her. "You keep saying that." "Because I mean it." He leaned back in his chair. "And I keep saying no." "Why?" she snapped. "You said this was about my father. Then take it up with him." He chuckled, a cold, slow sound that didn't reach his eyes. "Oh, I already did. Years ago. But he didn't listen." Ivy narrowed her eyes. "What did he do to you?" Cameron didn't answer right away. He stood, walked to the window, and stared out at the Vegas skyline like he was watching something far away. "He took something," he said finally. "Something I'll never get back." There was something in his voice, not anger. Grief. Just for a second. Then it was gone. "I'm not my father," Ivy said. "No," Cameron agreed. "You're the key to making him pay." "I'm not your pawn." "You are now." Her voice cracked. "Please, if you hate my family, hurt them. Not me." He turned to her, eyes dark. "Oh, Ivy. You think this marriage is about hurting you?" He stepped closer. "This is just the beginning. And you're going to help me destroy them. From the inside." Ivy's blood ran cold. There was no convincing him. No pleading. This wasn't about love. Or money. Or even revenge. This was about control. And Ivy had just become his weapon. That night, when he left the suite again, she tried to run. She slipped out barefoot, heart racing, using the emergency stairs instead of the elevator. But when she reached the lobby, a black car was already waiting. And the same bodyguard was standing beside it. "I wouldn't do that," he said simply. She backed away, tears stinging her eyes. "Just let me go," she whispered. He shook his head. "You don't understand. Mr. Thorne doesn't lose." Back upstairs, Ivy curled up on the giant bed, staring at the ceiling. She didn't know what Cameron Thorne had planned, or how far he'd go. But if he thought she'd sit quietly and let him use her, he didn't know who he was dealing with. She had her father's blood in her veins. And if this was war, then she'd fight back, even if she had to destroy them all to get free. Ivy didn't sleep. She lay awake in the dark, wrapped in silence, her eyes open and fixed on the ceiling. The weight of the ring on her finger felt heavier with every hour. Morning came like a ghost, pale light filtering through thick curtains. The air in the suite was too cold, too still. Cameron wasn't back yet. Ivy rose from the bed and paced. Her bare feet made no sound against the thick carpet, but her mind was loud. Questions raced, fast and wild. Who was Cameron before the billion-dollar companies? What had her father done to him? Why her? She needed answers. She went to the desk and flipped open the drawer. Inside was a hotel tablet, locked behind a password. She tried Cameron. Wrong. 1234. Wrong. Ivy. Still wrong. Of course. He was careful. But he couldn't control everything. She moved to the living room and turned on the television. It was one of those smart hotel systems with internet access. She navigated to the search bar and typed slowly. Cameron Thorne plus Walter Alcott. What popped up shocked her. Old headlines. Years ago. Alcott and Sons wins dispute over Phoenix land deal. Young innovator Cameron Thorne sues real estate giant for breach of contract. Thorne claims he was cheated out of his late father's property. Ivy's breath hitched. The articles painted a clear picture. Cameron's family once owned a small but valuable tech campus in Phoenix. It had ties to his father's legacy. But according to the story, after Cameron's dad passed, the land was sold off in a murky deal to Alcott and Sons. Her father's company. The lawsuit was buried quietly. Settled out of court. Cameron was 23 at the time. Ivy's throat went dry. She kept scrolling, hands shaking slightly. One photo caught her eye, a younger Cameron, thinner, eyes red-rimmed, standing beside a for sale sign. Another headline read, Thorne family legacy erased overnight. Ivy's stomach twisted. She remembered that year. Her father had celebrated a huge win with champagne in their garden. She'd been too young to understand what it meant, too busy dreaming of fashion school and college scholarships. But now, she was starting to understand. She stepped back from the screen slowly. This wasn't just about money. Or power. This was personal. The suite door opened around 10 a.m. Cameron walked in like he'd been there all along, suit crisp, jaw set, movements controlled. He looked rested. Focused. Dangerous. Ivy didn't move. I looked you up, she said, her voice quiet but sure. He didn't respond. Just removed his jacket and hung it on the back of a chair. I saw the articles. The lawsuit. The land deal in Phoenix. Cameron glanced at her, calm as always. Took you long enough. You think ruining me makes up for what my father did? He poured himself a drink and took a slow sip. I don't think anything makes up for what he did. But this gets me close. You think I'm your weapon? No, he said. I think you're the door. And now I'm inside. Ivy stepped forward. You can't blame me for his mistakes. Can't I? He asked, his voice colder than the ice in his glass. You're his daughter. You carry the name. You lived the life his lies bought. Tears burned in Ivy's eyes. I didn't choose that life. Neither did I choose to lose my father. Or our home. Or everything we built. But I lost it all, to yours. The pain in his voice cracked through for a second. Just a second. But then it vanished, sealed behind that wall of control again. I'm not him, Ivy whispered. Maybe not. But he loves you. You're his weakness. Which makes you my leverage. She stepped back, stunned. You're sick. No, Cameron said quietly. I'm careful. Later that day, Ivy sat by the window alone, staring out at the streets far below. She wanted to hate him. She tried to. But somewhere in the back of her mind, something else was growing. Not sympathy, not yet. But curiosity. What kind of pain turned a man into this? And how much damage was he really willing to cause? Because if he'd planned all this, marrying her, trapping her, blocking every escape, then she wasn't the only one in danger. Her family, the ones she'd trusted her whole life, had just been marked. And Ivy was the price. Ivy waited until Cameron was in the shower. The sound of running water gave her a 10-minute window, maybe less. She moved quickly. Back in the living room, she slid the tablet out from under the couch cushion where she'd hidden it after her last search. She turned it on, heart racing. This time, she didn't go looking for news or headlines. She needed someone who could help. Someone who knew her, but wasn't caught in Cameron's web. Her mother. Not her father. Not Zoe. Her mother had always been different. Softer. Calmer. Like she didn't fully belong in the glittery world of Alcott and Sons. She opened the hotel's email app and typed quickly. Subject. Urgent. Don't tell Dad. Mom, I need to talk to you. Privately. It's about Dad. It's important. Don't tell anyone. Please. Ivy. She sent it to her mother's personal email, the one she used for gardening newsletters and Instagram giveaways. Not the one her father's assistants monitored. She shut the tablet off just as she heard the water stop. By the time Cameron stepped out, towel slung around his hips, Ivy was curled on the couch pretending to read a magazine she hadn't turned a page of in 10 minutes. He glanced at her, unreadable, then walked past without a word. She held her breath the entire time. 3 hours later, the reply came. Ivy nearly dropped the tablet when it buzzed. From Mom. Subject, urgent. Ivy, I'm scared. What's going on? Are you safe? I had a strange call from someone claiming you were married. Your father told me not to believe it. Said it was a joke. Talk to me, baby. I'm here. Mom. Ivy's throat tightened. She typed quickly, hands trembling. It's true. I married Cameron Thorne. I was drunk. I don't remember saying yes. He won't let me leave. He says he's doing this because of Dad. Some land deal. He says Dad ruined his family. Is it true? The reply came almost instantly. From Mom. Ivy, listen to me. Yes. It's true. Your father made Cameron's life hell. His father trusted us. There was a deal, a verbal agreement, not written. When Cameron's dad died, your father took advantage. I didn't know until it was too late. I begged him not to go through with it. I've carried this guilt for years. Be careful, Ivy. Cameron has every reason to hate us. Ivy stared at the screen, hands cold, heart sinking. She had wanted to believe it wasn't real. That Cameron was twisting things. But this was confirmation from the one person she trusted most. Her father had destroyed Cameron's family. And covered it up. That evening, Ivy barely spoke. She watched Cameron across the room, now with new eyes. Not just as a manipulative billionaire, but as a broken man carrying years of buried pain. He caught her looking. What? He asked, casually sipping his drink. She hesitated. Did you love your dad? Cameron's jaw tensed. He looked away. More than anything. She studied him. You were close. He was everything I had left. What happened after the land deal? He didn't answer at first. Just stared into his glass like it could take him back in time. He got sick, Cameron said finally. Stress killed him before cancer did. Watching everything he built fall apart broke him. I watched him die with no justice. Ivy swallowed hard. I'm sorry, she whispered. He didn't respond. And yet, something in his eyes softened. Barely. But she saw it. For the first time, Ivy didn't just feel trapped. She felt torn. Later that night, while he slept, she crept into the bathroom and sent one more message to her mother. He's not who I thought. But maybe, neither is Dad. She stared at her reflection in the mirror. She didn't know who to trust anymore. Not her husband. Not her father. Maybe not even herself. But one thing was clear. The truth had shattered the life she once knew. And the only way to survive this marriage was to play the game better than the man who started it. The next morning, Ivy stood in front of the giant vanity mirror, dressed in a simple beige blouse and brown slacks Cameron had provided. She looked put together, calm even, but inside, she was unraveling. She'd made up her mind. She had to talk to her father. Face to face. No more secrets. No more lies. And she needed to see the guilt in his eyes for herself. "Can I see my parents?" she asked over breakfast, voice quiet but firm. Cameron glanced up from his coffee, eyes unreadable. "Why?" "I need answers." He sipped. Swallowed. "They'll lie to you." "Maybe. But I still want to hear it from them." A long pause. Then, surprisingly, he nodded. "I'll arrange it. But I'll be there. Both of them will lie. Especially your father." The private jet took off just after noon. It was sleek. Silent. Luxury built into every corner. Ivy barely noticed. She sat rigid, eyes fixed on the clouds. By 2 p.m., they touched down at a secluded airstrip in the outskirts of Napa Valley, where her parents had a weekend home. She hadn't been there in over a year. Now, it felt like stepping onto a movie set she didn't recognize anymore. Her mother stood on the front porch, hands clenched tightly. Her father was next to her, arms crossed, eyes sharp. He didn't look worried. He looked annoyed. "Are you out of your mind?" Walter Alcott snapped the moment Ivy stepped out of the car, running off to Vegas and marrying him. Her mother reached for Ivy's hand. "Walter, not like this." "No," Ivy cut in. "I'm not here for a lecture. I came for the truth." Her father glared at Cameron. "Get off my property." Cameron didn't move. "You don't own this one. Not yet, anyway." Ivy stepped between them. "I know about the land deal. Phoenix. Cameron's father." Walter's jaw clenched. Her mother whispered, "Ivy. I read the headlines. Mom confirmed it. You destroyed his family, Dad." "I did business," Walter snapped. "And I won. That's what this world is." "You exploited a dying man," Ivy shot back, voice trembling. "You used his trust against him." Walter didn't blink. He should have gotten it in writing. "That's your defense?" Ivy whispered. "That he was stupid." He shrugged, unapologetic. "We did what we had to do. You think I built this empire by playing nice?" Cameron let out a soft laugh behind her, the kind that didn't sound amused at all. Ivy turned to him. "This is what you wanted me to see, isn't it?" He met her eyes. "Now you understand." Her chest ached. Not from heartbreak, from disappointment so sharp it left her breathless. "Dad," she said, voice cracking. "You didn't just destroy his family. You made me part of it." Walter softened slightly, as if sensing he might lose her. "Ivy, you don't understand what it takes to survive in this world. One day, when you're older." "I am old enough," she interrupted. "Old enough to know when someone I love is a liar." Her mother touched her arm, eyes glassy. "Baby, I tried to stop him. I didn't know everything until after." Ivy shook her head. "You still stayed." Silence. Then Ivy turned to Cameron. "Let's go." Walter's voice boomed behind them. "You think he's better than me? He's using you. Wake up." Cameron turned, just before they entered the car. "That may be true," he said, flatly. "But I never claimed to be a saint." And then they left. Back at the suite, Ivy didn't speak. She sat curled on the couch, knees pulled to her chest. Everything she believed about her family had cracked wide open. Her childhood. The expensive schools. The private jets. All paid for by the destruction of someone else's dream. Her father hadn't just lied. He'd taught her to admire him for it. Cameron watched her from across the room. "You okay?" "No," she said honestly. "Good," he said. "Now you're ready." "For what?" she whispered. "To stop being a pawn," he said, "and start being the player." For the first time since the drunken Vegas wedding, Ivy didn't feel like a prisoner. She felt like a spy. She spent her days quietly watching Cameron, not because she feared him, but because she needed to understand the mind of a man who turned pain into power. And if she was going to bring her father down from the inside, she needed to learn from the best. One evening, While Cameron was on a call in his private study, Ivy stood in the doorway, leaning against the frame. "Who were you before the money?" she asked softly. He didn't turn. "Hungry." She waited. "Then, everything I have now, I built with blood under my nails. I watched your father tear down my life. I decided I'd never let anyone have that power over me again." "You don't trust anyone," Ivy said. He finally looked up. "Neither should you." Later that night, while Cameron was asleep, Ivy tiptoed back into the study. She had seen him lock the drawer in his desk, watched him punch in the 4-digit code. She tried what she remembered, 0-6-1-7. Click. The drawer slid open. Inside were files. Thick folders, labeled with names and dates. Alcott family board members. Former employees. Corporate partners. She opened one at random. Photos, surveillance notes, bank statements. Then another. Then her fingers stopped on a red folder. Labeled, IVY Alcott. Her mouth went dry. She pulled it out and opened it slowly. Inside were pages she couldn't make sense of right away, financial records with her name on them. Signed transfers. A trust fund she didn't remember. A shell company. Property she supposedly owned in Switzerland. But the worst was the photo clipped to the back page. It was of her, at 16, standing outside a building with a strange man. The caption read, "Alcott's hidden asset. Raised for future leverage." Ivy's head spun. She flipped back through the pages. Cameron had been watching her for years. Not just after Vegas. Before. Had he always intended this? Was she a target long before she knew his name? She shut the folder and shoved it back into the drawer, hands shaking. This wasn't revenge. It was strategy. In the morning, Ivy made eggs like nothing was wrong. Sat across from Cameron at the long kitchen island. She smiled when he asked her how she slept. Laughed softly when he said they'd be meeting someone from the Alcott board next week. But inside, she was boiling. Not just at him. At herself. For letting it get this far. For believing, even for a second, that there might be a version of this where they could trust each other. He looked up from his tablet. "You okay?" "Yeah," she said, cool as glass. "Just thinking." "About what?" She smiled. "How everything makes sense now." That night, Ivy called her mother using the burner phone she'd hidden in the lining of her suitcase. Her mother picked up on the second ring. "Ivy." "I found something," Ivy whispered. "Something I wasn't supposed to see." Her mother went quiet. "I think Cameron's been watching me for years. Before Vegas. Before I even met him." Still silence. Then her mother's voice, low and trembling. "Then it's worse than I thought." "What is?" "Ivy, there's something I never told you. About how you were, why we had you. Why your father." She stopped. "Just, get out. Please. Leave him before it's too late." But it was already too late. Because now, Ivy didn't just want answers. She wanted the whole damn truth, no matter who it burned. Ivy sat across from Cameron on the rooftop patio of the penthouse. The city glowed behind him in soft golds and purples as the sun dipped behind the skyline. He was nursing a glass of whiskey, calm as ever. But she wasn't calm. Not tonight. Not after what she found. Her fingers toyed with the edge of her wine glass. Her voice, when she spoke, came out steady, but sharp. "You've been watching me since I was 16. Cameron didn't flinch. He looked up slowly, studied her face. "You opened the drawer." "I saw the file," she said. "My name. Pictures. Notes. You knew me before we ever met." A long pause. "I did." "Why?" He leaned back. "Because your father was grooming you to be the perfect cover. And I knew one day, you'd be the only way to reach him." Ivy's stomach twisted. "What does that mean, cover?" Cameron stood, walked toward the edge of the patio. His voice was distant when he spoke. Walter Alcott didn't want a daughter. He wanted leverage. A clean image. An emotional shield for the press. Someone he could parade in charity interviews and gala speeches. The soft balance to his hard power. Ivy sat frighteningly, her heart thudding. "You're lying." "No," he said, turning back to her. "He adopted you when you were 3. Quietly. Paid to erase your real mother's records. You think it's a coincidence there are no baby photos of you in their house before a certain year?" Her knees went weak. "No. No. That can't be true. Check the hospital records. I have copies. Ivy, you were never part of the family by blood. You were an investment." Her mouth opened, but no words came out. Just shallow, trembling breaths. She remembered how her father had always kept her at arm's length. The way he praised Zoe publicly and sent Ivy away to summer programs no one else in the family attended. It had always felt off. But this was too much. He raised me like I was disposable, she whispered. Cameron didn't say anything. Just watched her. Then finally, "You weren't disposable to me." She looked up sharply. "You used me." "Yes," he said. "No apology. Just truth. But I also saw you. Even when you didn't know who you were." Ivy turned away, choking back something between a laugh and a sob. "So what now? You destroy him with me standing beside you." "I give you the choice," Cameron said, walking toward her. "Walk away. I'll take him down on my own. But if you stay, you become part of the storm." She looked at him, eyes burning. "I was raised to smile beside a monster. And now I'm married to another one." "Maybe," he said. "Or maybe you're finally waking up to who you were always meant to be." Ivy didn't answer. She walked to the edge of the patio, looked out over the city. The lies were too big to untangle now. Her parents. Her childhood. Her entire identity. But one thing was clear. She couldn't go back to being the naive daughter. Not now. Not ever again.